Welcome to another insightful episode of Me&my Health Up. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your wellbeing. And I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. Today I'll be discussing fibromyalgia with Amanda Love. Amanda Elsie Love is a registered holistic nutritionist specialising in fibromyalgia. She herself has suffered from this debilitating illness for many years and is now her passion to help others find wholeness and healing in their own lives. She is a writer, podcaster, registered holistic nutritionist, speaker, and currently resides in Prescott, Arizona with her two Westies. You can tune in and listen to her extensive library of podcast material called Fibromyalgia Real Solutions with Amanda Love on all platforms, or find out more about her personal coaching available on her website, which will be in the show notes. So how are you today, Amanda?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Anthony.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really keen to hear your story and more about what fibromyalgia is. So please share.
Yeah, my story. So I am now 31 years old, but back in 2010, I turned 20 years old in January of that year. And 2 weeks before that, I completed a personal training program, and it was 500 hours, 6 months course. And all of a sudden, I couldn't get off the couch. I was in so much pain. I was so fatigued. I would go to the gym. I was crashing. I was taking 2-hour naps, and I didn't know what was going on and stuff. So then I was like, okay, this went on for about 10 months. And then they said at the top, one of the top rheumatology places in Mesa, Arizona, they said, well, you have fibromyalgia. And I'm like, okay. I didn't know what that meant. Here's a pamphlet, a brochure, says, what is fibromyalgia? And then they said to me, they said to my grandmother, well, she's probably depressed. Well, yeah, you're depressed at 20 years old if you can't do anything. And then they were like, well, you could go onto the medications. I did a medication called Cymbalta. It's really pushed in the U.S. And also there's another medication in the U.S. that's also pushed called Lyrica. And you always see the commercials for it nowadays. But I did it for a few days. I felt horrible. I was nauseous. I was like, I'm not staying on this for the next, 60 years, 70 years. And I was like, okay, what's the next step? Next step was physical therapy. And I did the weights. I did swimming. I did it for like about 4 to 6 weeks. It was so funny. I always think it's funny that like 11 months before I completed that personal training program. So I always say to people, fibromyalgia is not a condition where you're overweight. You can look completely normal. And I think that's the problem with fibromyalgia, is a lot of times people look completely normal and people are like, well, why can't you do what you used to do? And eventually, like right next to the physical therapy, because this is what people do with fibromyalgia. We just try things. So next to physical therapy was a pain management. That was the most excruciating thing I've ever done in my life. So what they do is you would have 3 treatments and what they would do is draw little circles down your back, your neck, your shoulders. And what they do is you were in a hospital gown. And what they would do was they would shoot this huge needle right into all of those trigger points as you were awake. And so your blood sugar would crash, you were super lightheaded, and then they would say, oh, have some juice, have some cookies. It's going to raise it back up. But it was the most painful thing I've ever done. I would come out, my grandmother would drive us home. I was bawling, crying. I was in so much pain. And I only did 2 of the 3 treatments because I am the type, if something doesn't work, I'm not going to continue to keep doing it. That's just my personality. And eventually, in 2011, I turned 21 years old. And in the spring of that year, my grandmother found a little newspaper clipping, said wellness talk by a wellness chiropractor, 10 minutes from our house. And it said, come, it's a free talk. She went to the talk. I, of course, couldn't go because I was in so much pain. He said to her, your granddaughter has fibromyalgia at 20 years old. She's been very, very sick for a very long time. And a light bulb went off in my grandma's head, and she thought, oh, he really gets it. She had been a nurse. And I worked with him for 8 months. And he was the one who tested me for food sensitivities, found out I had 2 genes, predisposed me to a gluten sensitivity, highest in his practice at the time, but I wasn't celiac. I had a soy sensitivity, egg sensitivity, dairy sensitivity. And that will be 10 years in July of this year that I've been off of those. And then he also did some other things like stool, saliva testing, all of that. But I mean, that really was the biggest thing for my health, was turning that around, was getting off of those foods.
And so it was really discovering the food sensitivities that really helped you in terms of the management. And how do you feel today, given it's a decade on from where you were? So what's life like for you today?
Yeah, it's totally different. I'm not stuck on the couch. I could have a life. I could do anything I want to do. I could run errands. I think the biggest thing I tell people that people with fibromyalgia don't know is that you can't even do the basic things that normal people that don't have fibromyalgia take for granted. I always say taking a shower was draining. It was completely draining. It was exhausting. I was in pajamas all the time because I didn't want to get dressed because I was so exhausted. The shower water hitting you was painful. I always tell people, if you don't take it for granted, just giving someone a hug was painful. I remember my shoulders were the most tender part of my body. I was so in pain. I didn't give hugs. So when I eventually was able to give hugs again, I was doing it all the time, because you don't realize what you miss until you don't have it. And I think that's what people need to realize. Don't take doing these small things like working out, spending time with your family and friends for granted.
And in terms of what else have you done that you found has really helped you manage the condition, outside of eliminating those foods that you found that you're either intolerant or had a reaction to?
I feel like working on my stress, I think, is a big thing. I think a lot of times with fibromyalgia, we don't we we get I find a lot of people are A+ people, they're go, go, go. They want to keep doing everything. A lot of times people say to me, well, I'm going to take care of everybody else. And then it's like, well, when are you going to take care of yourself? Because you're going to run yourself into the ground, right? I think there's certain supplements that help. I feel like 5-HTP is great for sleep, getting that restful REM sleep that people don't get with fibromyalgia. There's one supplement I always recommend to people is Doctor's Best D-Ribose, which helps with pain and just helping with your energy. And it's great for people who don't have fibromyalgia. So I think there's so many different things out there to try. I just feel like we only focus on one thing. Supplements are great, but if your food choices aren't the best, then you really should be starting with your food. And then there's always the mindset of, are you going to do this or are you going to make excuses, right? And then also we have trauma. I feel like trauma plays a big part in health conditions also. So are you dealing with whatever trauma you've been holding on to for 20, 30 plus years?
And so in terms of, I guess those three areas, like, so what do you do around, to help you manage stress? So what works for you? And then in terms of how your diet's changed over that decade, if you could also share that. And, you obviously have addressed some past trauma, which has also helped. So just what sort of therapies helped address that past trauma? So if you could just touch, a little bit more detail on those three areas that you're focused in on that have really helped you overall.
Yeah, let's see, for trauma, I think the biggest thing for me is I talk about my trauma. I talk about it a lot. I grew up with my parents divorced. Not my stepdad. My dad got remarried. I was only 8 years old. And I had this trauma of going over to their house, a lot of just emotional stuff going on and everything with that. And and not being able to speak up for myself at that young age. I think finally now in the last year I've gotten to the point where I speak up, but I think you have to address it and you have to forgive those people because they're doing the best they can. You don't know what their story is quite. You might not know your parents' story, but I think you can say, oh, I'm going to move on from that trauma, right? I had a family member pass last August. So for me, right away, I was like, well, this person's like the closest person in my family that I'm close to, and they passed away. And I was like, before they passed, I went onto my church's website and saw that there was a grief group, and I signed up within that day, and they passed that following week, only missed the first meeting. And I spent 13 weeks with that grief group, 2 hours every single Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. And then there was also a workbook. So I was working on that daily. And I think a lot of times we don't want to talk about, oh, I am going through this horrible, horrible time in my life. And we don't want to talk about it. But then I find it's so funny because when I say this, like I posted like during the holidays and I was saying how the holidays were like horrible, that's when everybody was like commenting and saying all this like positive stuff. And I wasn't saying it to like get like sympathy or anything. I was just being real. And I think that's what the biggest thing is people love when you're real. And I think people need to know that you're going through whatever that difficult time is. And we're all going through something difficult right now with being locked down and not locked down and the coronavirus and all of that. So I think you gotta ask people, what are you dealing with? And if they say they're okay, they're probably not really okay. Dig a little deeper.
Yeah, my big takeaways from what you just said is really speaking up, having a voice and having a say. And I think you then followed through with that to then say that, now you speak your mind, you share a lot. So you're obviously sharing what's going on. You're being real and authentic. So people are really connecting with the true you, and there's no fake avatar that everything's perfect and rosy, and that's social media can certainly create that perfect avatar, but it's not true and authentic. As to everyone in life is going to encounter problems, and I think we do need to articulate those problems to people that care for us, so that they can. Well, you can't support someone unless you know that they need help, right? And so I think that's what you're saying is when you speak out, people realize you need help, and you actually get help from speaking out.
Yeah, and I also find when you speak out, it's good. It's a relief for you, and I think a lot of times we don't speak out about what we're going through. We're just like, oh, I'm just going to hold it in. And then it stresses us out, and then it stresses our bodies out. And then our immune systems go down the toilet because we're so stressed out and we're not sharing anything with anybody. So you have to find at least one person that you could share whatever struggles you're going through in life.
Yeah, it's so important that we have those close allies that where we feel safe to share everything, and not feel that we're being judged, but we're feeling very supported. So no, it's really good that you've learned from the past, and you now speak out, and you're more proactive on that front because of that earlier childhood experience where you felt that you wish you had spoken out, but you didn't at the time, and that's you sort of carried that for many years. On the nutrition, well, let's go to stress, because that closely follows the trauma. Is there's so much stress goes unmanaged and unchecked, unaware. So that past trauma can lead into chronic stress, essentially. So certainly when we suppress feelings, suppress emotions, we don't speak out, that stress builds up within us to a point where it's expressed, it's manifested essentially, and it can manifest itself through conditions, health conditions. So in terms of what you've learned around stress management, and you articulated before that a lot of the people you talk to with fibromyalgia are these type A people, and type A people tend to carry a lot of stress. So please share your stress tips that have worked for you and what you do today to proactively manage the stress side of things.
Honestly, I think stress is like the biggest thing people are always dealing with. For me personally, I try to get out in nature and take a walk. Just get away, get away from every social media, get away from your computers. I think a lot of times we're constantly on the computer, constantly watching TV, constantly have our screens, if we're reading. And so I think the biggest thing is getting away, even if it's for a couple of hours, get out in nature. If you live like we're somewhere like that there's a beach or there's somewhere to hike, do that, or just go downtown. I think with our stress, it's a work in progress, right? I mean, I'm going to be honest. I still struggle with that. That's one of the biggest thing I struggle with. But if you have, make sure to have someone who you can talk to about those stresses in life, because I think in life we just are like, okay, I could deal with it on my own. I don't need some outside help, but maybe you need some outside help. Maybe it's a family member, or maybe it's some professional help, right? I think it's okay to ask for professional help if you need help with that.
Yeah, I agree. Again, as you said before, it's speaking out and saying, "Look, I'm not in a good state. I need help," and actually seek it and be proactive on that front, as opposed to waiting for that point at which you can no longer tolerate or bear it or live with what you're experiencing. So nature's a big, and I must agree with the nature side of things. I certainly resonate with what you're saying around nature. It certainly calms my nervous system, makes me feel very grounded, and I need my nature time. I always look forward to it and schedule it in, those walks and just stepping outside, getting some sunshine, observing nature, the birds. So that's brilliant. In terms of your nutrition, you mentioned that, and obviously you spoke about those intolerances to food, and you removed them. Over that, so I'd like to hear, what was your diet like prior diagnosis of fibromyalgia, and then what did it morph into, in terms of where it is today? So if you could just sort of share that comparison of that journey that you've been on around nutrition.
Oh yeah, my journey with nutrition. So I just answered this question with someone else. Yeah, for me, I was just the normal American diet. I don't. I think it's funny. A lot of time, I thought it was healthy, and so it was just the same. I mean, I had oatmeal, I had cereal, that type of thing, but not cereal. I mean, not cereal as much, because I knew really young, at like 10 years old, like I knew nutrition played a big part. So I didn't have a lot of, I don't remember having a lot of soda growing up. I don't, but I mean, we had like chocolate pudding in our lunch boxes. I think it was just your normal, like, vegetables, fruits, protein, carbs at dinner, maybe a dessert. It wasn't like dessert all the time. And we didn't go out for like fast food or restaurants or anything like that. But I mean, I was having those foods that I shouldn't have. I was having eggs. I was having like wheat toast and stuff. So I was having cheese. I remember I was really into omelets before, and then I found out I couldn't have that. And so it wasn't like it was a horrible diet. It wasn't like a lot of processed foods or anything like that, but it's foods that my body just couldn't tolerate.
And your journey as to, obviously you then eliminated them from your diet to really help manage your condition. What are you now eating today, and how did you, I guess, grow into what you're eating today? So a little bit about that story, because you're a registered holistic nutritionist. So there's a piece of education that's come into your decade there that's really helped facilitate you eating better. And please share.
So for me personally, I eat vegetables. I don't eat as much fruit lately, but protein's big. I've been trying to be more protein conscious at every meal and stuff like that. But I mean, it takes time. I eat extremely healthy. I think the thing is, I still have sweets once in a while. I'm not gonna not say that, but I think for me personally, it's still like I'm still learning, right? I think with your eating habits, you're always like, okay, what can I do better to get in better health, right? And for me personally, I mean, my immune system is way better. I mean, I still struggle with that a little bit, but and I still deal with like some hormonal stuff going on. But I mean, for me personally, I find you gotta keep tweaking little things, little teeny things. Once you go off of, once you get rid of those foods, you really, there's not a lot you can do left except for tweak a little bit, right? Tweak what's working, what's not working. Make sure you're having those foods that make you feel good. I think tracking everything, not tracking like diet culture, but tracking like, oh, what is my food? How am I feeling with that food? That type of thing. I think a lot of times drinking water, we don't drink enough water, especially if you're in like a hot Arizona. But I mean, we don't ask ourselves why we have that headache. We automatically just go straight to the aspirin. So ask yourself why you're dealing with that health condition.
Yeah, so it's really bringing to the forefront the awareness of the effect that food's having on you in terms of how you feel about it after having it. So you're constantly checking in saying, well, I've had this in my meal. I'm feeling actually energetic and feeling alert and feeling, or I've had this is what I had for lunch, but it's not sitting well. It's not digesting well. Feeling a bit queasy. Yeah. So it's really, I think what you're saying is it's not, that hardcore diet culture is ticking the calories. I had this many calories. Oh, that's great. And, I'm restricting myself for this. What you're saying is just get connected with your food and understanding how your body's responding to that food.
Yeah, it really just comes down to just to listen to your body and see like, how am I feeling that day with that food? If you have a cookie, okay, well, how do you feel a couple of hours later after you had that cookie? Why did you have that cookie? Maybe you're dealing with some stress. Maybe it's a hormonal type of thing. I mean, like I know my body well enough to know like if I'm dealing with stress, I might be getting a headache, or uh, I get it. I get one major headache a month. I used to get headaches all the time from what I was eating. And I think we don't, people are like, well, I eat healthy. Well, healthy doesn't, it, it means so many different things. So headaches can play a part in those headaches. And I think people don't think about that. Or maybe you're just dehydrated. So there's multiple things that could be contributing to the headaches, contributing to the fatigue. So just don't think it's one thing.
Absolutely. So get more connected with your food, more self-aware as to how your body's responding to what you're putting into it. There's two other areas I want to touch on, given that you're a holistic nutritionist. One being exercise or movement is probably a better word, and the second being sleep. And I know on your website there's an ebook that people can download around sleep. So in terms of fibromyalgia, people are experiencing a lot of pain, as you mentioned, tenderness, fatigue, IBS-related symptoms. Let's start with exercise. So when you're in that state, when you're first diagnosed, the last thing you're probably thinking of is doing exercise, right? You just didn't have the energy. Your body was, in pain. Yeah. So that journey with, I like to say movement. So let's talk about that side of things. Yep.
Yeah. So after I completed that personal training program, which was like 6 hours, 4 days a week. After that, I completed that program, and I loved exercise. It was my thing. I was like, okay. And also, like, when I couldn't go to the gym, I quit my gym membership after like 6 months. I was like, and I wasn't doing much exercise for a long time besides walking the dogs. And even that was excruciating. And I know it's movement is hard. I think a lot of times with movement, I think what people with fibromyalgia, people are so funny. They're like, well, I want to work out and movement. I'm like, well, let's get you back to having a restful sleep first before we worry about movement. I feel like movement might be the last thing we would work on, honestly, because you're not if you're exhausted, you have no energy to work out, even go for a walk or do you can't even do the basic activities like cooking or anything like that. And so movement is not the thing you should be focused on first. And then once we get to movement, maybe it's just walking around your house or just something simple like that, not like anything strenuous, like not what I do now personally. Because
Which could be really hard for a type A person, right? That typically has that type A mindset. I've got to go hard and, do hard exercise and,
yeah,
and really get a sweat up. And yeah.
I used to be the type I was like cardio, and then when I was when I was super bad, I was like taking the dogs for excruciating long walks. And I think you have to realize it's going to come back. You're going to get a life back, but you can't put so much strenuous exercise could take a lot out of someone if they're ill. And like someone healthy, that's a lot. I mean, when you're first starting out, it's a lot when you're a beginner. So I think people need to realize with working out, you have to realize, yeah, working out's great and it's great to move your body, but maybe just start with something simple like stretching or something yoga, something really, really light. Even walking. Walking is amazing exercise, and I don't think it gets enough credit.
Totally agree. So yeah, light and gentle. And you mentioned in terms of prioritization, it wouldn't be the highest. It would be lower down the priority list in terms of recovering or at least improving the way you're feeling from the condition. And you mentioned sleep in that. So let's talk about sleep and how was it for you, and I guess it's really hard to sleep when you're in a lot of pain. So obviously it's improved. What have you done around sleep to really focus on it and improve it?
I think the biggest thing is just decreasing the stress. I had really high cortisol levels at nighttime and stuff. I actually got that was one of the things the wellness chiropractor did. But I think you have to de-stress, get darkening curtains, block out all that light. We don't want any blue light. We don't want anything. Your cell phone should not be by your head, right? I think a lot of times we have our cell phones and we're just looking at them. I think supplements are great for sleep. And make sure you're eating. Don't eat too much before you're going to bed. Just de-stress your body. No social media. Like, I think a lot of times, I think sleep is one of those things where we're like, well, it's the last thing I'm going to work on. And I always tell people it's the number one thing you should work on, whatever health condition you have. Because if you don't have your sleep right, then how are you supposed to give back to people in this world? How can I be on this podcast? How can I give back to people with fibromyalgia if I don't have enough sleep? And for some of us, that might mean more sleep. And that's okay. I feel like everybody needs at least 9 hours of sleep, but make sure you're getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time. I feel like if you're super stressed, maybe you need more sleep. I that's how my body works. If I'm stressed out, I need more sleep, or it's a hormone thing too, also. So like I need more sleep during that time. So I think you just have to track, like, why am I not sleeping? What did I do that night? Was I up at 11 o'clock, midnight? You all should be in bed by 10 o'clock. We want to get that restful REM sleep, and you should not be up 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning.
And that's very difficult for a type A person to prioritize sleep, isn't it? Because they just think it's a waste of time. I should be doing things. I need to be doing more, achieving more. And so I can imagine it's a difficult conversation for type A people.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think people, they're like, they know how important it is, but then they don't prioritize it. So if you have to, whatever your health thing that you're doing in life, you have to prioritize it. If that means you have to put it on your planner, oh, I am going to bed at 10 o'clock, and you're going to check it off, and you say, oh, I did it 4 nights out of the 7 days of the week. Oh, that's great. I'm at least moving forward. And now I always tell people, don't give yourself a hard time if you mess up or if you don't do it 100%. Well, you did it better than last week. Great job, right? And I think that's what the thing is with our health. We have to plan out these things to move us forward. It's all about being consistent in life.
Absolutely. And I can see how that checklist would resonate with type A people because they feel like they're achieving something, but you've got them focused on improving their sleep and they're checking off, yes, I did that night. Yes, I've done it again. And they focus on the checklist, but it's having that health benefit for them. Yeah, that's a really good tip. So how can listeners best connect with you, Amanda?
The best way they could connect with me is they could either follow me on Facebook, which is Amanda Lease Love, or Instagram, which is also Amanda Lease Love. And then you mentioned my website's going to be in the show notes, and the podcast. I mean, the podcast is growing, and there's quite a few episodes, guests, and solo episodes with me. And the best thing to do is get that free sleep guide so you could start getting that restful sleep, which is on my homepage.
Absolutely. So all those links you mentioned to your social media, your website, I'll put into the show notes as well as your podcast. So I'll have all of them in the show notes for the listeners to connect with you. Thank you so much for your time, Amanda Love. I've really appreciated the conversation. It's been very insightful in terms of talking about fibromyalgia. I've never had someone that's experienced fibromyalgia see me in practice or certainly on the podcast. So it's been fantastic to discuss the condition with you and what you do to manage it and how you help your clients. So thanks again, Amanda. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
And to the listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. Really appreciate you listening in. If you've liked the episode or if you know anyone who's got fibromyalgia, please share it with others because we'd love to get the word out there and help others with the condition. So thanks again and stay tuned for more insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. Thank you.